The fire at the center of the Stone Marrow camp had been burning since sundown, and by the time the human walked in, it had settled into the kind of low, serious burn that does not invite dancing or celebration.
A
It
great
invited
change is coming.
decisions. The
You must
orcs
be ready.
gathered
What must
around
I
it had
do?
learned to
Be
read
brave. We will
fires the
guide
way
you.
some people read faces, and this one said something important was about to happen. They were right. He came from the Eastern Trail, which was the direction people came from when they had traveled through human territory to get there. His coat was the faded green of a border patrol uniform, the kind that had not been issued in years, the kind men kept wearing after their service ended because they had not yet figured out what to wear instead. The left shoulder carried a patch over a tear that something sharp had made, in a place and time the coat did not explain. His boots were caked in Appalachian mud, the dark clay of the mountain passes north of the valley, which meant he had been walking for at least 2 days. He stopped at the edge of the firelight and stood without speaking. In orc culture, silence at the threshold of a gathering is either deep respect or extraordinary stupidity. The clan had not yet decided which one this was. His name was Cord Hale. He had been a border garrison soldier for 8 years and a civilian for 3, and he carried both identities the way a man carries 2 coats he cannot choose between, wearing neither properly, feeling the weight of both. He was 36 years old. He looked like a man who had rehearsed a sentence for 3 days and was standing at the moment of saying it out loud for the first time, knowing that once said, nothing about the next several hours would be in his control. He stood in silence for 3 full minutes. War Chief Gross sat at the head of the circle on a carved stone seat worn smooth by generations of War Chief weight. He was close to 60, broad in the way that comes from decades of use rather than youth, scarred in patterns that told stories he no longer bothered to explain. His patience was not the patience of a calm man. It was the patience of a dangerous one, the kind that comes from knowing you can end any conversation you want to end and therefore have no particular need to hurry it. He studied the human with the flat attention of a man reading something that has not yet revealed whether it is interesting. Speak, he said. I need an orc wife, Cord said. By tomorrow. One beat of silence. Then the laughter started. It came from the left side first, where the younger warriors sat. It spread to the right, to the women, and then outward to the edges where the children stood, who understood nothing about marriage but understood perfectly well when adults were behaving in ways that required commentary. The canyon walls caught the sound and returned it doubled, so that it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. A human walking uninvited into an orc camp was notable. A human asking for an orc wife by tomorrow was the funniest thing the Stone Marrow clan had heard in a season. Cordhale waited. He stood in the center of that sound and let it move around him the way water moves around a stone. Not through him, not changing the shape of what was underneath. He had expected the laughter. He had counted on it actually because laughter is a crowd releasing pressure, and a crowd that has released pressure is easier to speak to than one that is still building it. Growth did not laugh. He watched the human with his hand near his belt and his expression doing nothing at all. He raised one hand. The laughter stopped. Not gradually, instantly. The way sound stops when someone who has earned it asks for silence. Explain, Growth said. Cord reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it out. Growth did not take it. Reading a written document in public was beneath a war chief. It implied that ink held authority over the spoken word, which in orc culture was an insult with specific weight. Cord lowered the paper. He had known that before he offered it. The offering was courtesy. The lowering was understanding. He spoke instead. 8 years ago, he said, I was stationed at the Southern Pass Garrison. The narrow strip between orc territory and the human settlements along the eastern ridge. My job was to watch the border, to make sure nobody crossed who shouldn't. Someone crossed. A woman, he said. Her name was Den. The name moved through the circle the way a stone moves through still water, not loudly, but in widening rings that reached every edge. The older women on the far side of the fire went very still. A warrior to Groth's left turned his head. The name Den did something to the air around the fire that the name of a stranger would not have done. Groth's voice changed. It went from flat to careful. Den of the Stone Marrow, he said. Yes. Who died 2 years ago. Yes. Your business with her. This was the part Cord had rehearsed most. He had spent the 3-day walk through the mountain passes finding softer versions, gentler angles. ways of framing the truth that would not arrive like a blow. None of them had worked in rehearsal. None of them were going to work now. Orcs respected Blunt. He gave them Blunt. We were together, he said, 7 months. She crossed the border every third night. I left the gate unlatched. The growl started immediately, low, guttural, the sound orc warriors make when the question of being offended or being violent is still open. These are different things. Humans confuse them. A warrior on the left stood, one hand on his blade. Growth stopped him with a look that was an entire conversation about sitting back down. The warrior sat. Cord continued. He told them about the 7 months. The gate left unlatched every third night. The thing they had built together in the space between a garrison wall and a mountain pass. The thing that did not have a name in either side's law. When the Valley War started, Den went home. She never told him she was carrying his child. He paused. And I, he said, never wrote, never checked, never did what a man does when he suspects he should look but is afraid of what looking will find. He told them what he had learned 3 weeks ago, a letter from the clan, facts that rearranged 8 years of deliberate not knowing into something he could no longer keep in the corner where he had stored it. Den had been gone for 2 years. A daughter, 8 years old, named Bray, raised by the clan. We know this child, Groth said. Den's daughter. My daughter, Cord said. Her name is Bray. Growth looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in the old war chief's expression that did not reach his face entirely. A calculation completing itself. The letter told you what it was written to tell you, Growth said. A half-blood child cannot remain in the clan under our laws. She must go to her father, with conditions. The father must have an orc wife, someone to teach the child the language, the rituals, the traditions. Without an orc wife, the clan considers the child abandoned by both worlds. And a child abandoned by both worlds goes to the human orphanage in the Eastern Territories. Your law and ours agree on that, Cord said. They agree on protecting the child, Growth said. Cord looked at the war chief. Is there a weaker word that's still accurate? Growth studied him. No, then that's the right word. The fire crackled. 40 people sat around it and said nothing. The word that had just been said sat among them like a coal that had rolled out of the pit, too hot to touch, too dangerous to leave where it was. Growth looked at the circle. Does any woman here wish to speak? Silence. The silence that forms when 40 people simultaneously decide that someone else should be the first to break it. Warriors shifted. Women studied the fire, the ground, the stars. The children at the edges went very still, understanding from adult body language that something important was happening, even without knowing what. And then, from the outermost edge of the circle, what's the child's name? Every head turned. The voice had come from the back, from the position in any gathering where people sit when they want to see without being seen, half in shadow. Angled away from the firelight in a way that looked habitual, the practiced positioning of someone who had decided observation was safer than visibility. She was young by orc standards, mid-20s, lean, with the build of someone who worked with her hands and had been doing so long enough that the work had shaped the hands back. Angular face, sharp bones that caught light at the jaw and cheek, eyes that carried a weight Cord recognized not because he knew orc women, but because he saw a version of that same thing in his own mirror every morning. The heaviness of someone who had lost something that did not have a replacement, had not finished processing the loss, and was not entirely certain they wanted to. Rin, Growth said. The word had 2 layers in it. Surprise was one. Warning was the other. You have something to say. I asked a question, she said. I'd like an answer. Cord looked at her across 20 feet of firelit ground. She was not looking at him the way the warriors had looked at him, which was the way you look at a problem you are deciding whether to become violent about. She was looking at him the way you look at something you are still taking the measure of, something whose full dimensions have not yet declared themselves. He understood, in some wordless place below conscious thought, that she was deciding something. That the question she had asked was not casual curiosity, that she had been sitting at the edge of this gathering and watching everything with the attention of someone who had already processed most of it and was now down to a single remaining variable. Bray, he said. Her name is Bray. She looked at him when he said it, not at the name, at his voice when he said it, at the place in his throat where the name caught slightly before it came out. At the involuntary thing that happened to a person's face when they said out loud the name of a child they had never held. Rin stood. She was taller than he had expected. She carried her height the way you carry a tool you have been using long enough that you have stopped noticing you are carrying it. She crossed the circle with deliberate steps, each one a choice rather than a habit. She stopped 3 feet from Court Hale, the distance of evaluation in any culture, close enough to see clearly, far enough to still have options. I have conditions, she said. How many? How many can you handle? A murmur moved through the circle, something like disbelief, something like grudging attention. They spoke outside the fire circle in the cold dark between the clan's tents, where the wind carried pine resin and the smell of mountain elevation. Growth had permitted it with a nod. The clan watched from the circle's edge with the pretending not to watch posture that is the orc equivalent of pressing a glass against a wall. Rin's conditions came fast and specific. The child learns orc, not greetings, not survival phrases. The language fully. Agreed. She eats orc food. She knows the rituals, the songs, the words that don't translate. Agreed. She is not raised as a human with green skin. Agreed. You're agreeing too fast, Rin said. You're right about everything, Court said. Why would I argue? Because humans argue. It is what you do. Not this human. She looked at him. We'll see. Then she said something that shifted the weight of the conversation. I knew Den. Cord was quiet. We grew up in the same camp. 3 years difference in age. She was louder than anyone I have ever met. The kind of woman who announced every thought she had to the nearest available ear the moment it arrived. The fact that she kept you a secret for 7 months must have been an act of willpower that shortened her life. She would have wanted someone to ask about her. I think about her every day, Cord said. That's why I'm standing here. Rin studied him, then, why are you doing this? Coming to the fire, speaking, volunteering. I have my reasons, which are the ones I'll tell you when you've earned them. How do I earn them? By being honest. Haven't I been? You've been desperate. Desperate isn't the same as honest. Honesty is what's left after the desperation burns off. What if it doesn't? Then we have a problem, do we? Not yet. Dawn came cold and deliberate over the Appalachian Ridge, light arriving in pieces, gold at the edges, gray at the center, the sky taking its time about becoming itself. The fire had been rebuilt overnight, larger, fed with cedar that made the smoke smell like something between a forest and a decision. The full clan had gathered, not just the 40 from the night before, but others from the outer camps, shepherds, hunters, and the category of orc who attends events they disapprove of precisely in order to disapprove of them in person. Rin stood on one side of the fire. She wore leather, practical, the clothing of a woman who had considered what the morning required and dressed accordingly. Her hair was braided with a single strip of dark red cord, a mourning ribbon she wore on mornings when something important was happening, when she needed to remember what permanence cost. The ribbon was for Ren. Cord would not learn that until later. Cord stood on the other side. He had used a borrowed razor in his only clean shirt and the combination of effort and falling short that most people wear to their own weddings. He looked like a man who had prepared for something that mattered by doing everything he could think of and then arriving at the realization that none of it was sufficient. This marriage is not celebrated by the clan, Growth said. The clan permits it. For the child, that is what this is. Is it enough, Cord asked. It is more than most get. On that we agree. The ceremonial blade was old. Its edge had been dulled by generations of ritual use, which made the cut slower and more intentional. Growth drew it across Rin's palm. She did not blink. A thin line of dark against green skin appeared and held. Then Cord's palm. He made no sound, though the effort showed in the muscles along his jaw. They pressed their palms together. Orc skin against human skin, green against pale, the larger hand and the smaller. Rin's grip was the grip of someone who was choosing to hold rather than being held. The distinction mattered to her. It showed in the angle of her wrist, the firmness of a person who has decided this is theirs to do. Growth bound their hands with leather cord and spoke the binding words. What is joined by choice cannot be broken by circumstance. From the edge of the crowd, a woman stepped forward, small by orc standards. Old in the way that working hands get old, knuckles carrying decades in their geometry. Rin's mother. She held a cloth-wrapped bundle with the care of someone transporting something that cannot be replaced. Inside, a knife, bone handle, short-bladed, worn smooth from 30 years on one man's belt. Your father's, she said to Rin. Not to cut, to protect. Rin took it with her free hand. Her jaw tightened, the compression that happens when grief and gratitude arrive simultaneously and have to share the same expression. She held the knife the way you hold something that is both a comfort and an ache. Her mother turned to Cord. Feed her properly, the old woman said. She forgets to eat when she works. The child eats first. Always. And if you make my daughter unhappy, the mountains are not as large as you think they are. She returned to the circle. The ceremony was done. They stood with their hands still bound, surrounded by a clan processing something unprecedented before breakfast. The smoke rose from the cedar fire and went straight up in the cold, still air, which meant no weather coming, which meant the mountains were in a cooperative mood, which was more than could be said for the 40 orcs in the circle. How long do we wear this? Cord asked, lifting their bound hands. Until sunset. That's 12 hours. Is 12 hours too long? Is that a test? Everything is a test. You'll learn which ones matter. Marriage is long. Get used to it. They left before the camp fully woke. The trail east was narrow and cold and wound through pine stands that cut the morning light into bars. Rin walked at her own pace, which was not slow. Cord kept up without comment. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The mountains moved around them the way mountains do, not visibly, but with the constant presence of something that has been there much longer than any of the problems currently being carried through it. The weight of Rin's pack was practical. The weight of Cord's was different. He was carrying something that had nothing to do with the bags on his back, and it showed in the tension that had nothing to do with the trail's incline. Rin spoke without turning around. Did you ever write to Den? Cord's pace broke for one step, then resumed. Yes. She stopped and turned. He met her eyes. In the silence that followed, every version he had rehearsed on the 3-day walk dissolved and left only the true one. After the Valley War ended, he said, a trader came through the southern pass heading west. He had come from Stone Marrow territory. I asked him if he had heard anything about a half-blood child in the clan. He paused. He told me there was one. He told me her name. Rin watched him without speaking. I went back to my bunk that night and I wrote a letter to Den. I told her I knew about Bray. I wrote that if she would let me, I wanted to be part of it. I wrote the whole letter in one sitting. And then I folded it and put it at the bottom of my pack. The next morning, I told myself I would send it when I had more to say. The morning after that, I told myself I would send it when things were more settled. And then I stopped telling myself anything about it and I just carried it. 8 years in the bottom of every pack I have owned. Rin looked at him. So Den died not knowing you had written? Yes. And Bray grew up not knowing you had written? Yes. And you carried proof of what you knew and what you chose to do with it in the bottom of your bag for 8 years. Cord looked at the trail dirt. Yes, that is not the same as not knowing. I know. Rin turned and continued walking. He followed. She did not tell him to. She also did not tell him not to. In the space between those two things, which was a kind of offer with the sentiment removed, he walked behind her through the pine stands toward a garrison that was now, by blood and leather cord and one morning ceremony, something other than what it had been yesterday. The garrison came into view through the trees an hour later. It was worse than he had told her it would be. One stone building with a wooden addition attached to the east side, the addition leaning at the angle of something that had considered leaving and given up halfway through. The windows were small and let in a quality of mountain light that illuminated the dust before it illuminated anything else. One room, a stove that worked 3 days out of 5, a bed that was more structure than comfort, a table, one chair. Rin stood in the doorway. She stepped inside, walked the length of the main room, looked at the addition, went to the window, stood in the center of the space and turned slowly in a full circle, reading the building the way you read a face, looking for the things it revealed without meaning to. One chair, she said. One was all I needed. Now you need 3. And a wall. Cord looked at the nail holes he had made that morning, already rendered insufficient by someone who had been his wife for 6 hours and was making a structural assessment of his life with the clarity of a person who has not yet had time to become accustomed to the sight of it. There's wood out back. he said. From the old watchtower. Show me. The wood was stacked behind the garrison with the haphazardness of storage that assumes permanence, half rotting at the edges, colonized by beetles with ambitions. Rin moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had built things before and knew immediately what was worth keeping. This one, not this, rot, this works. They gathered until noon. By evening, they had the frame of a wall. Rin built from the inside out. She started from where the child would stand, where the child would sleep, where the child's feet would land in the morning when she swung them off a bed. Then she worked backward to where the wall needed to be. Cord had never built anything in that direction. Why inside out, he asked. Why do humans build outside in? Because you start with the wall, and then what goes behind it, whatever fits. That's the problem. You build a container without knowing the contents. Then you put people in and wonder why they feel like they don't belong. They worked until the light was gone. The wall was rough, slightly crooked at the top where Cord's measurement had been optimistic. But it divided the room. One side for them, one side for a child who hadn't arrived yet. Rin stood in the child's room and looked at the empty space. A hook for a coat. A window that faced the mountains. The evening light coming through it in the golden way of mountain evenings, all at once before it disappeared. Everything is waiting, she said. For what? For her to fill it. She needs a bed, Rin said. Can you build one? I can cut wood into shapes. That isn't building a bed. What's the difference? Whether the child feels something when she touches it, whether the surface speaks or is silent. A bed built by her father's hands says something different than one purchased, even if it's crooked. Cord built the bed that night. It was not beautiful. One leg came out shorter than the others and had to be corrected with folded leather. The joints were tighter than they should have been. The headboard was plain. He didn't know what an 8-year-old half-orc girl might want to see when she woke up. And some things need to be chosen by the person they belong to. He set his tools down in the small hours and looked at what he had made. Rin appeared in the doorway. She looked at the bed without comment. Then she kneeled beside it and ran her palm along the top rail. The wood was rough where it should have been smooth. She went to the stove, found a flat piece of scrap stone, and came back. In the dark, in the nearly finished room of a house that had been one man's silence for 3 years and was now, by blood and leather cord and one morning ceremony, something else. Rin began to sand. You don't have to do that, Cord said. I know. Then why? Because a child who touches something smooth learns the world can be gentle. A child who finds splinters learns it can't. Cord picked up a second stone and started on the footboard. They worked without talking in the rhythm that physical work creates when two people have decided, without naming it, that they are working toward the same thing. The sound of stone on wood, the dust in the lamplight, the mountains outside the narrow window, invisible in the dark but present, exerting their weight on the shape of everything else. At some point, Cord became aware that Rin had stopped working. She had her hand flat on the headboard, not smoothing, not working, just resting. Her face was angled toward the window that faced the place where the orc territories began, toward whatever was there that could not be carried in a pack. Cord said nothing. He went back to the footboard and kept sanding. Outside, the Appalachian dark pressed against the walls of the garrison with the impersonal weight of mountains that have been dark for 10,000 years and will be dark for 10,000 more, and have no opinion about the small, warm light inside this building or the two people inside it. One pressing her hand to a piece of wood in a child's room. One sanding a bed rail in the lamplight, both carrying things they have not yet had the right conversation to put down. At the bottom of Cord's pack, under everything else, lay a folded piece of paper. His own handwriting. Younger, neater, the penmanship of a man who still believed that careful letters made careful men. He had not opened it in 8 years. He did not open it tonight. But he knew exactly where it was. He always had. The riders came at dawn on the third day, 4 of them, moving through the morning mist with the efficiency of people who consider unnecessary sound a failure of planning. Cord heard the hooves before he saw them, vibration through the garrison floorboards, rhythm carrying purpose up through the wood and into the soles of his feet, where he stood on the roof fitting shingles against the October cold. He climbed down as the riders cleared the tree line. Through the window he could hear Rin stop moving inside. The stillness of a person who has been busy and suddenly isn't. Then her boots on the floorboards, coming toward the door. The two of them standing side by side in the yard of a building that had been one man's solitary post 72 hours ago and was now, theoretically if not yet practically, something else. The lead rider dismounted, young, broad-shouldered, carrying the solemn expression of a man performing a duty he had been assigned rather than chosen. Behind him, a second rider held the reins of a smaller horse. On the smaller horse sat a child. Bray was small for 8. Half-orc features arranged across a face still deciding what it wanted to be. The jaw from her mother's side, prominent and set with a stubbornness that looked inherited rather than acquired, and above it a brow that carried the same architecture. But the skin was mostly human-colored, a faint green undertone visible in the morning light, like the color of shallow river water over pale stone, belonging fully to neither direction. Her hair was dark and braided in orc style, leather cord threaded through in the practical manner of someone who had been taught that hair is something you secure before the day's work begins. She wore orc clothing, hide and cloth, sized for someone expected to grow into the next version of herself. Her pack was too large for her frame. Children's packs always look that way, not because the objects inside are heavy, but because the objects inside are never just objects. They are the compressed weight of everything being left behind. Every familiar thing reduced to what can be carried, and the carrying itself is proof that the rest is gone. She looked at the garrison the way children look at places they have been told are home but do not feel like it. Careful, the expression of someone who has learned that the word home and the feeling of home are entirely separate animals that happen to share a name. Cord climbed down from the last rung of the ladder. His hands were shaking. He had tracked deserters through winter passes in the dark. He had stood his post during 3 border skirmishes when the Valley War was spilling over its official edges. He had walked alone into an orc camp and asked for a wife by tomorrow. None of those things had made his hands shake. A child on a horse looking back at him with his own eyes. That did. The lead rider spoke in orc, formal, ritualized. Rin translated from 2 steps behind Cord, her voice level. The child Bray, daughter of Den of the Stone Marrow, is delivered to her father according to clan law and the conditions agreed upon at the fire circle 3 days past. Tell him I accept, Cord said. Rin translated. The rider responded briefly. What did he say? He told her to be brave. The rider lifted Bray from the smaller horse and set her on the ground. She landed with the practiced ease of a child who had been on horseback since before she had a choice in the matter, absorbing the drop through her knees without thinking about it. She straightened, adjusted the straps of her pack, looked at the garrison, looked at Rin, then looked at Cord. 8 years old, pack too heavy. The expression of a child processing the information that the stranger in front of her is her father. Processing it the way a person processes a physical blow in stages, the full weight of it arriving slower than the initial contact. Cord kneeled. He brought himself to her level because it was the only thing he could think to do that did not require speaking. And he was not ready to speak yet, and kneeling bought him 3 seconds. Bray looked at him, gray eyes, his eyes. He felt it move through him like current, the shock of seeing your own eyes looking at you from a face you have never met. Den's jaw, then his hair, his eyes, the mathematics of inheritance working itself out in a child who had not asked to be the proof of any equation. She spoke, fast, flat, orc syllables delivered with precision. Cord looked at Rin. She asked where you were when her mother died. What do I say? What's true? Cord looked at his daughter. He was about to say he didn't know Den was sick, which was true, but it was only part of the truth, and the part that came before it, the part about knowing and not writing, the part about the traitor and the letter at the bottom of his pack. That part made the whole thing something different than a man who simply hadn't known. Tell her I wasn't there, he said. Tell her I should have been. Tell her those are 2 different sentences and both of them are true. Rin translated. Bray's response came in a single word, spat with the efficiency of something compressed under pressure for a long time. Rin was quiet for a moment. She said, you're a liar. Is there more? She said liars smell like humans. Cord looked at his daughter, who looked back at him with the patient contempt of a child who has been disappointed by adults enough times to have built an entire organizational system around the experience. Tell her she's right, he said. I smell like a human. And I don't know yet if I'm a liar, but I'm here, which is more than I've been for 8 years. She can decide what that's worth. Rin translated. Bray listened. Her face did not change. Children who have learned that adults say things do not adjust their expressions for sentences. They adjust them for patterns, and patterns take time to establish. The riders left. The dust settled. 3 people stood in the yard of a building that had been one man's lonely post 3 days ago. Bray walked toward the garrison, past Cord without looking at him, past Rin with a brief sideways assessment that was different in quality from the way she had looked at Cord, more measuring, less closed. She went through the door into the main room and stopped. She looked at the stove, the table, the 2 chairs and the log stool, the wall Cord and Rin had built together. Rough at the top, nails visible, the smell of fresh pine still coming off it. Then she went through the gap into the smaller room. She stood in the center of it, the shelf, the hook, the window facing the mountains. The bed Cord had built with joints too tight and one leg corrected with folded leather. The surfaces sanded smooth in the lamplight by a woman who believed that what a child touches is a sentence being spoken to them. Bray set her pack on the floor. She touched the shelf. She touched the windowsill where Rin had placed a small arrangement of dried mountain flowers, because Rin had learned from Den that Bray noticed small things. Then she turned to Rin, who had followed her in and was standing in the doorway. She spoke in Orc, quiet. Rin translated to Cord, who was in the hall. She says the room isn't finished. It isn't, Cord said. She wants to know why. Because it's her room. She should decide what goes where. Bray listened to the translation. Something moved in her face. Not warmth, something earlier than warmth. The geological shift that happens deep underground before anything changes on the surface. She pointed at the bed, then at the corner by the window where the morning light would arrive first. Cord moved the bed. It took 4 minutes because one leg caught on an uneven board and had to be worked loose. He did not ask for help. He did not comment on the difficulty. When it was in the corner, he stepped back. Bray sat on it. Then she lay down. Then she curled onto her side facing the window and said nothing else. Rin pulled the blanket over her. The girl did not resist. She did not thank her either. She lay in the bed her father had built and looked at the mountain ridge she had known her whole life from the other side of the valley, now visible from a different angle, the way everything familiar looks slightly wrong when you are seeing it from a place you have never stood before. In the early afternoon, when Bray had been lying in her room for 2 hours without sleeping and without asking for anything, Rin went in and sat beside her on the floor, not across from her, beside her, close enough to touch if either chose, far enough that touching remained a choice. She did not bring cheerfulness. She did not bring questions. She brought only her presence, which was the Orc understanding of what children who are grieving actually need. Not comfort, company. Someone willing to sit in the same room as the grief without trying to resolve it. Bray's first question came in a whisper, her second at normal volume. By the third, she had sat up. They spoke in Orc through the wall. Cord sat at the table on the other side and listened to the sound of his daughter's voice, the rhythm of it, the cadence of questions, the way she paused before speaking as if testing the weight of each word before committing to it. He could not understand a single syllable, but he understood the architecture of the conversation, the careful opening, the testing, the gradual increase in volume that meant the child was deciding whether her voice was safe in this space. An hour later, Rin came through the gap in the wall. She set the kettle on the stove and spoke without turning around. She wants to know why her room smells like new wood, because we just built it. She wants to know why, because she needed a room. She wants to know why you thought she needed one, because she's my daughter. She says that word doesn't mean anything yet. Cord looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, the rings of whatever tree had been cut to make it. What do I do? He asked. Rin set 2 cups down. Wait, for what? For her to decide you're worth talking to. How long does that take? As long as it takes. What if she never decides? Then you wait longer. That's the only plan that works with children who've learned that promises are noise. Cord wrapped both hands around his cup and sat in the low firelight of a garrison that was trying to become something it had never been. Listening to the wind work through the ghosts in the addition wall, feeling the weight of a sentence in his coat pocket that he had been carrying for 8 years and had not yet decided what to do with. On the 4th morning, Rin was braiding Bray's hair on the porch steps when the child spoke the question she had been carrying. Rin's hands knew it was coming the way hands know things when they have been working close to a person long enough. a change in the quality of the child's stillness. The breath held a half-second longer than usual. Bray spoke in Orc, quiet and deliberate. Rin's hands paused on the braid. One breath, two. Then she continued. Her voice, when she answered, was level in the way a surface is level when someone has taken care to make it so. Cord was at the woodpile and could not hear the words, but he heard the silence that followed, and he set the axe down. What did she ask, he said, when Rin had tied off the braid. She asked if I'm going to die too. Cord looked at Bray, who was looking at the mountains. What did you say? I told her that everyone dies, that staying is harder than dying, and that I choose hard things. Why? Because easy things don't build anything. Bray turned and looked at Rin, then at Cord, then at the mountain ridge that held the garrison on three sides the way cupped hands hold something small and breakable. She didn't speak again for an hour, but she stayed on the porch. That was its own kind of answer. The pack sat in the corner of Bray's room for 2 full days before the child opened it. She did it in the evening while Rin was mending near the stove and Cord was outside checking the roof seams against the weather coming down from the north. Rin heard the buckles. She did not go to the doorway. The sound of things being sorted, objects placed on the floor one at a time with the careful quality of a child handling things that cannot be replaced. Then silence. Then Bray in the doorway holding something wrapped in cloth. It was small. The bundle fit in both her hands, wrapped in the leather cord-style Orc women use for things that need protection during travel. She looked at Rin with an expression that was a question. Rin crossed the room. Bray held it out. Rin unwrapped it carefully, the way you unwrap something when you do not know what it is, but already know it matters. Inside, 2 things, separated and distinct. The first, a small piece of paper, folded into quarters, her own name written on the outside in Den's handwriting. Rin recognized it instantly. She had seen that handwriting on 100 scraps over 20 years of friendship. The second, a heavy envelope, sealed with wax, Bray's name written on the outside in the same hand. Below the name, in smaller letters, also in Orc, when the time is right, you will know when. Rin held both objects and looked at Bray. Your mother, she said. Bray nodded. Rin took the small, folded note to the window. She opened it away from Bray, not from secrecy, but from the instinct that certain things need to be read alone first. She unfolded it, one side of one small square of paper. Den's handwriting, slightly unsteady in the way of someone who wrote it without much strength left. One line. I knew you'd be the one to ask her name. Thank you for that. Rin read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and held it against her sternum for a moment with both hands. Not a performance. The involuntary gesture of a person receiving something they did not know they had been waiting for. She put the note in her coat pocket. The sealed envelope she set on Bray's shelf, standing upright against the wall where the child could see it. Safe. Waiting. Bray watched all of this. Then she asked, in Orc, what the note said. It said your mother knew you would be all right, Rin told her. Bray looked at the envelope on the shelf. Then she put the cloth wrapping back in her pack, buckled it, and went to sit at the table for dinner. She ate everything on her plate. The first time. The morning day came on a cold Thursday. Bray woke, dressed, sat at the table, ate the porridge Rin placed in front of her, set her spoon down, folded her hands, and stopped. Not anger, not a tantrum. Something older and more deliberate. The stillness of a child who has entered a ritual she understands completely. Cord looked at Rin. Rin's expression carried recognition, the look of someone who has seen this before and knows exactly what it means. Morning silence, she said quietly. Orcs observe it for the dead. 1 full day without words. The silence is a gift you give to the one who can no longer speak. She is giving her voice to Den. How long? From dawn to dark. What do I do? Sit beside her. That is everything. Don't talk. Don't try to fix it. Don't ask if she's okay. She is not broken. She is mourning. Those are different things. What's the difference? Sadness happens to you. Mourning is something you choose. She is choosing to honor what she lost. Your job is to be present for that without making it about your presence. Cord pulled his chair next to Bray's, the distance that had become their language over 4 days. Close enough that the choice to be beside her was visible, far enough that she retained the option to not acknowledge it. Bray did not look at him. She looked at the wall, the one he and Rin had built together, rough at the top, the nails still unpainted, the pine smell beginning to fade as the wood settled into itself. Hours passed, morning became afternoon. The light through the window moved across the floor in the slow, patient way of mountain light, measuring time in inches. Cord's back tightened, his legs went stiff. He did not move. Rin worked quietly on the other side of the room, the sounds of her work steady and unobtrusive as weather. The morning day was not sad in the way Cord had expected. It was heavy and quiet and completely sincere. Bray sat inside it the way she sat inside her room, as if she belonged there and knew exactly what it was for. At dusk, when the last light was pulling back from the window, Bray's hand moved, slow, deliberate. Her small fingers traveling the few inches across the table to the edge of Cord's sleeve. Not his hand, his sleeve. The halfway point between refusal and beginning. The distance a person travels when they have decided to move but have not yet decided how far. Cord did not breathe. He let her hold his sleeve the way you let a bird land on your hand, without hope, without movement, with the complete and focused awareness that what is happening is rare and requires you to be still in a way you have never had to be still before. They stayed that way until the window went dark. When nightfall came, Bray said one word, orc, one syllable. Rin's voice, when she translated, was thicker than usual. She said, stay. Cord nodded. Bray let go of his sleeve. She stood, walked to her room, and closed the door behind her. Gently. The first time she had closed it herself, which meant it was hers in a way it hadn't been before. The language lessons began by accident on the sixth day, the way most important things begin, through the side door rather than the front. Cord was fitting a new section of stovepipe, a joint that had rusted through, hammering a replacement from a tin sheet. The work required concentration and produced a steady rhythm that filled the main room. Bray watched from the doorway with the focused attention of a child who has decided that watching an adult struggle is entertainment enough. She pointed at the cup on the table. Thar, she said. Cord looked at the cup, then at her. She shook her head, made the sound again, slower, one hand rising to her throat. The sound comes from here, not there. Start from the throat. Cord tried. Bray's expression was the expression of a teacher who had already decided the student was going to be terrible at this and had reached a prior accommodation with that fact. Worse, she said, say it wrong with more confidence. Wrong with confidence is better than correct with apology. Rin appeared in the doorway behind Bray. She covered her mouth. She's teaching you orc, Rin said. She's insulting my pronunciation. They're the same process. By the end of the first week, Cord could say 9 orc words badly and 2 almost correctly. Bray could say 0 human words because she had not tried. Rin explained this when Bray was in her room one evening. She needs to see you fail first. You are her father. Fathers are supposed to know things. She needs to see you be terrible at something and keep going anyway. I'm terrible at everything that involves throat sounds. Exactly, and you keep trying. That is the lesson she is watching for. That a person can be bad at something and not stop. Children who have had people quit on them need to see that more than anything else. On the 9th day, Bray pointed at the garrison door. Kel, she said. Kel, Cord repeated. Bray considered this, then made a hand gesture that meant, approximately, it will do. That's the nicest thing you've said to me. She looked at him with the flat patience of a child who has not yet decided whether she finds him funny. That evening, Cord tried the other direction. He pointed at the window in Bray's room. Window, he said. Bray looked at the window, the calculation of a child deciding whether to cross a bridge she had been standing near for days without committing to. Oro, she said, the eye of the wall. That's better than window. But she was sitting at his table in his house using his words. The willingness to call something stupid is often the same thing as the willingness to learn it, wearing different clothes. The night Rin told Cord about Ren began with the window frame. They were fitting the last section, Rin holding the beam level while Cord drove the nails. Hold, strike, adjust, strike. The kind of work that quiets the conscious mind enough for the deeper one to find its way to the surface. I had a child, Rin said. The hammer stopped. She did not look at him. Her hands stayed on the beam, a half-blood, like Bray. Her voice had the flatness of a sentence that has been rehearsed until the emotion has been worn from its surface. The father was a traitor. Human. He came through the clan territory twice a year. The clan didn't approve. An orc woman choosing a human was a betrayal of something they could not name precisely, but felt with certainty. When I became pregnant, they made it known that this was not acceptable. They set it to the ground around my feet, which is sometimes harder to argue with than someone saying it to your face. She adjusted her grip on the beam. Her hands were steady. The baby came early. Too small. She lived 3 days. The garrison was quiet except for the wind. What was her name? Cord asked. Wren. It means the one who arrives. She arrived. She arrived and she left, and I stayed. Staying was the worst part. Because staying means waking up every morning in the room you built and finding it empty. Because staying is not one choice. It is a choice you make again every morning for the rest of your life. Cord drove the last 3 nails. That is why you volunteered, he said. At the fire circle. Not for you, Wren said. Not for the camp, for Wren, for Den, for the chance to do the thing I did not get to finish. Bray isn't Wren, no. But she is a child between 2 worlds who needs someone who speaks both. That is something I know how to do. Cord set the hammer down. He looked at Wren's hands on the beam, the history in them. Den knew you would be the one to ask, he said. The note said so. She trusted me with most things. I trusted her with most things. That was what it was. Wren let go of the beam. It held. She went to wash her hands, her back to him, and he understood that the conversation was finished, not because she was done with it, but because she had given exactly as much of it as she intended to give, and what remained belonged to her. The letter from the Federal Border Management Division arrived on a Tuesday in a government envelope with a tracking seal on the front. Cord read it at the table while Wren was outside and Bray was in her room. He read it twice. Then he set it face down on the table and sat for a long time looking at the wall he and Wren had built together. The rough top edge, the visible nails, the pine smell that was beginning to fade as the wood settled into itself. Wren came in from outside, saw his face, and sat down. She turned the envelope over and read it without expression. The garrison, along with 17 other border posts along the Appalachian line, had been designated for decommission under the Federal Restructuring Act. They had 60 days to vacate. The property would revert to federal land management. The house they had built had 60 days. Wren set the letter down. She looked at the wall, at the window they had fitted together that faced the mountains, at the shelf moved twice to find the right position, at the bed visible through the gap, in the corner where the morning light fell first. She stood and went to the wall. She put her hand flat against it, palm to pine, the way she had pressed her hand to the headboard that first night. Not smoothing, not working, just the contact of a person feeling what they have built. Roots don't need a building, she said. She was not looking at him. But we need to know where we are planting them before this one disappears. Cord watched her hand on the wall. We, he said. Wren looked at her own hand. Then she took it away from the wall and went to start dinner. That night, after Bray was asleep and the fire was low, Cord went to his pack. He reached to the bottom, past everything else, and took out the folded paper. His own handwriting, younger, neater. The penmanship of a man who was 36 years old in both years, and in the belief that careful letters made careful promises. He carried it to the table, sat with it in front of him. Wren was at the stove, with her back to him. She heard the silence that followed the rustle of paper and turned. She looked at what he was holding. She sat down across from him without being asked. I wrote this 8 years ago, he said, the night after the traitor told me about Bray. So that is the letter. That is the letter. You wrote to Den. I wrote that I knew. I wrote that I wanted to be part of it. I wrote her name. And then I folded it and put it in the bottom of my pack, and I have been carrying it since. Wren looked at the paper. Not reading it and not throwing it away, Cord said. Both at once. She was quiet for a moment. Take it up the ridge tomorrow, she said. I'll come with you. To read it? To do whatever you're ready to do with it. I don't know what I'm ready for. Then wait until you do. But stop carrying it like something you're hiding from yourself. You know it's there. It knows you know. That is not carrying something. That is being held by it. Cord set the paper on the table between them. They sat with it there in the low firelight, the proof of what he had known and not acted on, the 8 years of deliberate not looking compressed into one folded sheet. Outside, the Appalachian dark held the garrison without judgment, without comfort, with the impersonal permanence of altitude and stone. Through the wall, Bray breathed in her sleep. The rhythm of a child who had not yet learned that the world was heavy, lighter, faster, the sound of someone who was, in the way sleep allows, not between two worlds, just breathing. Cord put his hand flat on the table beside the letter. Not on it, beside it. Tomorrow, he said. Rin stood and went to bed. He sat at the table for another hour in the dark with the letter beside his hand and the sound of his daughter breathing through the wall and the 60-day clock that had started ticking the moment the federal envelope arrived. Counting down toward the moment when the house he had built would stop being available and they would have to decide what they were building toward instead. He was beginning to think ready did not mean what he had always assumed. He had always assumed ready meant the absence of fear, the condition of having resolved enough that the next step felt safe. He was beginning to think ready meant something simpler. What was left when you stopped waiting for the fear to go away? Just a man at a table with a letter beside his hand and his daughter breathing through the wall, deciding that the difference between carrying something and being ready to put it down was where the rest of his life was going to begin. The morning Bray spoke her first human sentence. Cord was in the yard repairing the south-facing shutter that had come loose in the night wind, and Rin was moving through the rooms quietly, checking that everything was where it needed to be, the way a person checks the things they are responsible for, not because they distrust them, but because checking is itself a form of care. Bray was on the porch. She had developed the habit of sitting on the top step in the early morning, with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes on the tree line, the watchfulness of a child who had grown up in a clan camp where the tree line was where things came from. Riders, weather, news. The porch step was her version of the clan's eastern lookout, and she occupied it with the same focused patience. Cord had been watching her do this for 3 weeks without commenting on it. He had learned that Bray's habits were not performances. They were information, if he paid attention long enough to read them correctly. The mist was still in the valley when she went still. Not the ordinary stillness of a child watching something, a different quality, the stillness of recognition. She stood. Then, without turning to look at him, without apparent awareness that she was doing it, she said in clean human words, "The grammar correct, the sentence complete. They're from the clan." Cord dropped the hammer. It hit the yard dirt with a flat sound and lay there. Bray turned and looked at him. The expression of a child who has been in possession of a capability for some time and has been observing the adult long enough to decide that today is the appropriate day to deploy it. "Don't be surprised," she said. "I've been listening for 3 months. Her accent was there, underneath the words, orc rhythms pressing against human syllables. But the words were clear. The sentence was real. Subject and verb and object, all present, all in the right order. "I was waiting," she said, "to see if you were worth talking to." Cord looked at his daughter on the porch step. The hammer in the dirt. His hands, shaking again, which he now understood was what his hands did in the presence of things that mattered more than he had words for. He looked at Rin, who had appeared in the doorway behind Bray, wearing the expression of a person who had known this was coming and had been waiting with the patience of someone who understands that certain things cannot be rushed and therefore does not try. She had known. She had watched Bray absorb the language the way a stone absorbs heat, all of it happening below the surface until the surface itself changed. She had known and had not told him because telling him would have made it a performance, and Bray would have felt the expectation. She let it be what it was, a child deciding, on her own terms, on her own morning, that a particular man had spent sufficient consecutive days being who he said he was. The riders came out of the tree line as Bray had announced. 2 of them, not 4. The first was the young warrior who had delivered Bray 3 months ago, carrying now the nod of a man who has been watching the outcome of something from a distance and is here to witness the completion of it. The rider beside him was someone else. She was older. Perhaps 55, carrying the authority of a person whose job is to remember things exactly as they were and report them exactly as they are. She sat on her horse with her back straight and her hands loose on the reins and her eyes moving across the garrison yard with the systematic attention of official assessment. Rin went still in the doorway. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of recognition. The kind that comes not from seeing something unexpected, but from seeing something you had prepared for in the abstract suddenly made concrete, suddenly real in a way that preparation never quite manages to anticipate. Cord looked at her. Something had changed in her face. In 3 months of learning to read that face, its careful economy of expression, the specific places where what she was thinking reached the surface despite her intentions, he had never seen this configuration. The jaw set, the shoulders precise, the eyes doing something they did not usually do, which was to show the working of the calculation happening behind them. He crossed the yard to stand beside her. "Who is she?" he said quietly. Rin's voice when she answered was controlled in the deliberate way of someone applying control rather than operating from it. "Mace," she said, "my father's sister, the clan's keeper of traditions. She records births and deaths, the things that happen between them. She decides whether a tradition has been honored or broken. Is she neutral?" "No, a beat. She is the one who voted to remove me from the clan's inner circle after Ren died," Rin said. "She argued that an orc woman who chose a human and lost the child was a distraction from the clan's coherence, that my grief was making others uncomfortable with choices they had not examined in themselves. Growth sent her specifically. He always sends the person with the most personal reason. He believes a person with personal stakes pays more attention. He is not wrong. He is simply using it in a way that has nothing to do with fairness. What does she want? To determine whether the conditions of Bray's placement have been met, whether the child has been raised with orc tradition, whether this constitutes what it was contracted to constitute. And if she decides it doesn't?" Rin's jaw moved. "Then the arrangement is considered failed. Bray goes to the Eastern Territories. And I lose the last formal connection I have to the clan. Permanently." Cord looked at her. "You never told me that part. It doesn't change what I was building. It changes what you're risking." She looked at him then, direct and steady. "I've risked worse for less," she said. Then she walked out into the yard to meet her aunt. Mace dismounted with the economy of a person who does not waste movement. She stood in the garrison yard and looked at Rin with the expression of a woman who has been rehearsing a neutrality she does not entirely feel and has almost achieved it. "Rin," she said, "Mace." 2 syllables apiece. The entire history of a complicated relationship compressed into first names and the silence around them. Mace looked at the garrison, at the addition with its patched seams, at the yard with the repaired shutter half finished on the ground, at the porch where Bray stood watching with the evaluation of a child who has been introduced to enough official visitors to understand that official visitors require a particular kind of attention. Then Mace looked at Bray. Something moved in the older woman's face. Not warmth, not coldness. The recalibrating expression of a person who has not been close to a child in some time and is rediscovering what it means to be in front of one, the specific humanizing force of an actual child, standing on actual porch steps, smaller than the situation around her. She spoke in Orc, formal, the language of assessment. Bray answered. Then, without being asked, without a pause between the Orc and the human words, Bray turned to Cord and translated herself. Her voice was steady, the Orc accent still shaping the human syllables, but the words clear. "She wants to know if I've learned the old songs." Bray looked at Mace and sang 4 bars of an Orc mourning song. The melody was low and precise, the kind of song that exists not to be beautiful but to be accurate, carrying specific meaning in specific intervals. "She wants to know the harvest story." Bray told it. 3 minutes, uninterrupted, the Orc syllables coming without hesitation, the cadence of a child who has heard something enough times to absorb not just the content but the rhythm of it. "She wants to know if I know what day to observe silence." "I know," Bray said. "I observed it." She looked at Cord when she said it. He held her eyes. She looked back at Mace and continued, answering each question in Orc and then turning to give Cord the human version without being instructed to, as if she had decided that this was how this was going to go. Her father was going to hear every word. There was not going to be a version of this that excluded him. She was standing between them, not behind Rin, not beside Cord. Between them, in the exact center, the position of someone who belongs to both and has decided that belonging to both is not a division, but an addition. Then she stepped forward. She spoke without waiting for another question. Her voice was not loud, but it had the quality of a voice that does not need volume because it has decided what it is saying and is committed to saying it entirely. "I know the songs," she said. "I know the stories. I eat Orc food on Orc days and human food on human days. I speak my mother's language. I am learning my father's. She paused. I sleep in a bed my father built with crooked joints and one short leg fixed with folded leather. My room has a window that faces the mountains. I put the bed in the corner where the morning light comes first. I chose where it went. Another pause. Shorter. And I am not half of anything. I am all of everything. The yard was quiet. The wind moved through the pine stand at the yard's edge with the patient indifference of wind that has been moving through these mountains since before anyone had opinions about it. Mace looked at Bray for a long time. Then she looked at Run. Rin took one step forward. She had been standing slightly to the left, watching. Now she entered the space directly. She stopped a few feet from Mace and looked at her aunt without looking away, the first time in 6 years she had done so. Mace, she said, Rin, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to say that Ren's death was handled correctly because it wasn't, and we both know it. I'm asking you to look at what I've built. Mace's expression did not change. You've always built things, Rin. You built your first shelter at 9 years old when the clan moved and the adults were occupied. You built Den's daughter a room before she arrived. The question has never been whether you can build. The question is whether what you build holds. Look at her, Rin said. She is standing between two languages and she is not falling. That holds. Mace looked at Bray. Bray looked back. Then Bray went to her pack, which she had brought to the porch that morning without explanation. Rin had noticed and said nothing, trusting the child's instincts about what the day would require. Bray reached inside and took out the sealed envelope. She held it for a moment. She looked at it with the expression of a child who has been carrying something important for 3 months and has been waiting, as instructed, for the right moment, and has decided with the certainty of a child who has been paying close enough attention to everything around her that this is it. She broke the seal. She unfolded the papers inside. There were 2 sheets. The outer page was addressed to Bray in small, careful letters. Below the address, a single instruction in Orc. Give this to whoever comes to judge whether you belong. You will know who that is. The inner sheet was addressed to Mace. Den had known, the same way she had known that Rin would be the one to ask the child's name. The same instinct that had guided the small, folded note. Den had known who Growth would send. She had known because she had grown up in the same camp as Mace and had watched Growth make decisions for 30 years. She had known the way you know the people who shape the place you came from without having to think about it. Bray read the outer page to herself first. Then she lifted the inner sheet and began to read aloud. She read it first in Orc, all the way through, her voice level and unhurried, giving each line the time it needed. Then she stopped, went back to the beginning, and read it again in human words, turning the Orc into English as she went. The translation not perfect, but complete. Every meaning carried across. Nothing lost that mattered. Den had not written to Cord. Den had written to Mace. The letter said what Den had not been able to say in person because she had not had a person to say it to. It said what she had been carrying since the day Ren died, and the clan had made its feelings known through the ground around Ren's feet rather than her face. It said, you were there the morning after. You came to Rin's tent before anyone else. You sat with her. I saw you through the gap in the tent wall. You stayed for an hour and you did not speak and you did not leave. And then you walked out and voted with the others, and I never understood how both of those things could be the same person. It said, if Rin is standing in front of you right now, it means she chose the hard thing again. She lost Ren and she stayed. She lost me and she stayed. She went to a fire circle and answered a human's question and built a room for a child she had never met and stayed. She is the only person I have ever known who chooses staying every single time, even when leaving would be easier, even when no one would fault her for it. It said, you were wrong about her the first time, Mace. Don't be wrong twice. Bray lowered the paper. The yard was still. Mace had not moved during the reading. She stood in the garrison yard with her hands at her sides and her face arranged in the careful neutrality of official purpose. And beneath that arrangement, visible to anyone who was looking closely enough, the disturbance of a person receiving something they were not prepared for. Her hands moved, a small adjustment, fingers opening slightly. The involuntary release of a grip held too long. The keeper of traditions, whose authority came from never being visibly affected by the material she handled, whose job was to be steady in the presence of everything the clan had decided to preserve. Her hands were not steady. She looked at the letter. Then she looked at Rin. Rin looked back. There was no triumph in Rin's expression, no satisfaction of the vindicated. The expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for 6 years and is watching it be set down, not by her own hands, but by the words of the person who knew her best and had taken the time, in the last of her strength, to write them down so they would outlast her. Mace folded the letter. She held it for a moment. She gave it back to Bray. Then she looked at the garrison, at the walls, at the window that faced the mountains, at the porch where 3 months of daily life had worn a pattern into the wood of the top step. The shape of a child's weight repeated. She spoke in Orc. Rin translated, her voice quiet and even. The arrangement is fulfilled. The child belongs. Cord heard the words. He looked at Rin. Belongs where? He asked. Rin was looking at Mace. Something was happening between them that was not quite reconciliation and not quite forgiveness, and was not pretending to be either. Something smaller and more honest than either of those large words. The thing that happens when two people who have been wrong toward each other in different ways at different times arrive at the same moment and acknowledge, without naming it, that the moment exists. Rin turned to Cord. Here, she said, Cohen. Mace looked at Rin for one more long moment, then she went to her horse. She mounted. She looked down at Bray. She spoke. Brief, direct. Rin translated. She says your mother chose your name well. Bray looked up at the older woman. She did not smile. She said in Orc, I know. Mace paused. Then she said something further, something not addressed to Bray but to Rin, something low that Cord could not hear from where he stood. Rin listened. She said nothing in return, but something shifted in her face, the rearrangement of a person receiving something they had stopped expecting to receive. Mace rode. The young warrior followed. The sound of hooves on mountain trail faded into the trees, and then there was only the wind and the garrison and 3 people standing in its yard in the morning light with the dust settling. Cord looked at Rin. What did she say? He asked. At the end, what did Mace say to you? Rin was quiet for a moment. She said she was there the morning after Ren died. She said she sat with me for an hour because she did not know what else to do. She said she has been carrying the vote she cast ever since. And she said she is glad I stayed. Cord looked at the garrison door. Through it, he could see the gap in the wall that led to Bray's room, the corner where the morning light fell first, the window that faced the mountains. Rin, he said. She looked at him. Tonight, the ridge. She nodded once. He went back to the shutter. He picked up the hammer from the dirt where it had lain since Bray's sentence had knocked it from his hands, and he stood in the yard holding it and feeling the weight of the day settling around him in layers. We need to go up before we do anything else, he said. Rin came to stand beside him. I know. They went up after dark when Bray was asleep. The trail to the ridge above the garrison was steep and the night was cold. The cold of Appalachian elevation in the weeks before true winter arrives, when the air tastes like iron and the stars are too close. Rin walked with the lamp. Cord walked with his hand in his coat pocket, his fingers around the folded paper. The ridge opened out above the tree line onto a flat shelf of rock that faced west and south, the valley visible below in the dark, and beyond the valley the shapes of the Orc territories in the distant ridgeline, black against the slightly lighter black of the sky. Cord took the letter out. He held it. Rin set the lamp on a flat stone and stood beside him. Not in front of him, not behind him. Beside him, which was the only position from which a person can be present for something without interfering with it. He looked at the letter in his hand, his own handwriting. The man he had been at 28 who had written these words with the careful penmanship of someone who believed that careful letters made careful men. Who had written a sentence containing the words our daughter and then hidden it at the bottom of a pack and carried it for 8 years like a stone he had agreed to carry and then refused to acknowledge the weight of. If I read it, he said, I'll know exactly what I wrote. And then there's no version left where I didn't know. Rin said nothing. I thought ready meant not being afraid, he said. I thought it meant I'd reached a point where the next step felt safe. But it's going to cost something no matter when I do it. Yes, so ready isn't the absence of cost. No, Rin said. Ready is deciding the cost is worth it. Cord looked at the letter one more time. He held it over the lamp. He did not open it first. He held it to the flame unread and let it go in that form, with all of it still inside, the words, the knowing, the proof. Because burning it unread was not destroying the evidence. He had been the evidence for 8 years. He would be the evidence for the rest of his life. What he was releasing was the version of himself that was still 28 years old, still standing in the garrison with the letter in his hand, still choosing not to look. The paper caught, burned fast at the edges, slower at the center. The words he had written curled and went dark and became something else. Something that no longer had the shape of a sentence, no longer carried meaning in any direction. The ash rose on the updraft from the ridge, went toward the valley, toward the Orc territories in the dark distance. Cord stood on the rock shelf and watched his carefully written words become particles and travel west, and felt something shift in the place where he had been carrying the letter for 8 years. Not in his pack, but somewhere closer to the center of how a person moves through their days. She would have written back, he said. She always wrote back, Rin said. It was one of the things about her. She couldn't let a letter sit unanswered. I know. And you would have come. Yes. Cord looked at the valley. But that didn't happen. And what did happen is Bray telling a clan inspector that she's not half of anything, in a language she taught herself by watching me fail at pronunciation for 3 months. Rin made a sound, brief, not quite a laugh, but close to one, the sound of a person who has found something genuinely worth finding. She was relentless about your pronunciation. She still is. She'll be relentless about everything, Rin said. She gets it from Den. Den was relentless about everything she decided mattered. Cord turned and looked at Rin, the lamplight on her face, the ridge wind moving her braid, the mountains behind her, the same mountains he had been looking at from the other side of the valley for the entire span of Bray's life. There is one thing we haven't spoken about, he said. Rin looked at him. The 60 days, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her coat and produced a folded piece of paper. Not the federal letter, something smaller. Handwriting he didn't recognize. This came this morning, she said, before the riders. He took it. Orc script on one side, which he couldn't read. She translated from memory, from Groth. He says there is a strip of land on the eastern edge of Stone Marrow territory, at the base of the ridge where both sides used to post boundary markers. After the Valley War, the markers were removed. The land sits between the federal boundary and the clan's formal territory. It belongs to neither side on any current map. Cord looked at her. He says the clan will not oppose settlement there, Rin said. He says it carefully, not permission, not a gift, simply that the clan will not oppose it. That's growth. Yes, he solves 2 problems again. The clan gets the half-blood child settled in a place he can monitor. We get ground that no federal decommission order can touch because it isn't on the federal map. And you? Is it enough? Rin looked at the valley below them, at the dark shape of the Orc territories on the far ridgeline. My father's knife is in my coat, she said. My mother told me to protect. You cannot protect from a building with a 60-day notice. You can protect from ground you have chosen. She turned to him. We will need to build again, she said. From the inside out, Cord said. She looked at him. A sound that was close to a laugh but meant something more than that. Yes, from the inside out. Cord looked at the lamp on the flat stone, at the valley below, at the darkness full of mountains. Then, what is Cohen, he said. She looked at him. It was not a question she had been expecting it at this moment. You said it today, he said, to Mace. You said it like it meant something more than the word for home. Rin sat on the flat rock beside the lamp. He sat beside her. The mountain cold settled around them both. Co is home, she said. You know that. Bray taught you. Cord nodded. Ren is root, the word for what a tree puts into the ground, what holds something in place when everything above it is moving. He said it. Cohen. Not just the place, Rin said. The going itself, the act of putting roots into the ground. Humans say home and mean the building. Orcs say Cohen and mean the choosing, the decision to stop being temporary. He looked at the garrison below them. The lamplight in Bray's window, left burning low so that if she woke, she would not find herself in the dark of an unfamiliar place. Have I put down roots? He asked. Rin looked at the garrison. You are in the process of digging, she said. Is that enough? Roots begin by digging. No one puts them down by deciding to. They put them down by staying. By staying when it is easy, and by staying when it is not, and by not treating those 2 kinds of staying as different things. Cord thought about 60 days, about the federal letter, about the strip of land at the base of the ridge that belonged to neither side on any map, about where roots go when you have decided to keep digging. The roots don't disappear when the building does, he said. He was not asking, he was working something out. The roots stay, Rin said, even when the tree above them is gone. You can't remove them without removing the ground itself. Then we find the next place to put them. Rin looked at him. Yes, she said. She reached across the space between them. Her hand found his. Green fingers threading through pale ones. The grip of a person who has decided rather than a person who is being held. The same grip as the ceremony 3 months ago, in the same mountain air. But different now in the way things are different when they have been chosen twice. The first time is the agreement. The second time is the proof. He turned his palm up, held it. The same palm that had pressed against hers at the ceremony, that had driven the nails, that had tried to build a bed and gotten the joints wrong and had one short leg. That had been flat on the table beside the letter instead of on it. They sat on the ridge above the garrison with the lamp between them and the valley below and the Orc territories in the distant dark, and neither of them said anything for a long time. There was nothing that needed saying. The saying had already happened in the building of a wall and the sanding of a headboard and the sitting through a mourning day without speaking and the walking up a mountain trail in the dark together and the standing beside each other when the thing that needed standing beside arrived. The words were just the record of what had already been decided. Cord said, Cohen. Rin said, yes. They came down from the ridge in the mountain dark, the world visible in outlines, the path known rather than seen. The garrison below showed Bray's window still lit, the low lamp they had left burning. They came through the door. Bray's room was quiet, the breathing through the wall steady and light. Rin went to the stove to check the fire. Cord stood in the center of the main room and looked at what 3 months had done to a one-room garrison with a leaning addition and a single chair. The wall he and Rin had built from the inside out. The table with its 3 chairs, one of them a log stool, with a leather-tied top that Bray had decided made an acceptable seat. The shelf on the eastern wall, level despite the building's opinions about level, holding 3 objects, a dried cluster of mountain flowers, the bone-handled knife from Rin's father, and the folded note in Den's handwriting that Rin had placed there on the morning she had read it. He looked at the gap in the wall that had become the threshold of his daughter's room. At the window in that room, invisible from here, but present, facing the mountains. In the morning, Bray would be on the porch step. In the morning, there would be a shutter to finish and a second step to build, in the beginning of plans for ground at the base of a ridge that belonged to neither side on any map, which meant it could belong to 3 people who were learning what belonging meant. He heard Bray shift in her sleep, the small sounds of a child repositioning. One arm moving, then stillness again. He stood in the main room of the garrison and listened to his daughter breathe through a wall he had built, in a house he had not known he was building when he started, in a life that had not announced itself as his life, but had turned out to be exactly that. The morning came the way mountain mornings come, all at once and golden, the light arriving through the eastern gaps in the ridgeline with the clarity that high elevation gives to early sun. It came through Bray's window first, the corner position catching the first angle of it, which was why she had pointed at that corner on the day she arrived. She had known where the light would fall. She had chosen the place where she wanted to receive it. Bray was on the porch step when Cord came out with his tools. She had her knees up and her eyes on the tree line, the morning watchfulness. But it was different now. She was not watching for what was coming from outside. She was watching the way you watch something when you are inside it and know it and have decided it is yours to watch. She did not look at him when he picked up the hammer, but she said, in human words with Orc in the undertow of them, "What do we need?" 2 boards, he said, long ones, and something vertical for the lean. She stood. She went around the side of the building to the wood supply without being asked. He heard her sorting through it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been watching that process for 3 months and had absorbed it without announcing the absorption. She came back with 2 boards that were the right length. He looked at them, then at her. She shrugged. "I've been watching." "Yes," he said. "You have." Rin appeared in the doorway with tea, the morning version of a habit that had established itself without discussion in the second week. She handed 1 cup to Cord, 1 to Bray, kept the third for herself, and leaned against the door frame with the ease of a person who is exactly where they have decided to be. They built the step in the morning, all three of them, Bray handing boards and cord fitting them, and Rin checking the level with the flat stone method she trusted more than any instrument because she had made it herself. The step went in crooked on the first attempt. Cord pulled it and reset it. Crooked on the second attempt. Bray watched both attempts with her teacher patience, the one she had worn in the first week of orc lessons when Cord could not produce a single sound correctly, and she had already made her peace with the inevitability of this. The third attempt was level. She approved it with the hand gesture that meant "it will do," which was the highest grade in Bray's assessment system, and the one Cord had learned to receive as the substantial thing it was. He sat on the new step. Bray sat beside him. Rin remained in the doorway with her cup in both hands, looking at the two of them sitting on the step they had just built, and her expression was the rare kind, the kind that arrives without announcement and stays because it means something. The expression of a person who has built something and is looking at it and finding it, against the reasonable expectations that accompany building, sufficient. The mountain held the morning the way it held everything, without preference, without commentary, with the permanence of something that was there long before any of this and will be there long after. Bray looked at the tree line. Then she looked at Cord. She said, "We need a name for it." "For what?" "The step. Things you build should have names." Cord thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "What's the orc word for a place you sit without explaining yourself?" Bray's expression moved through the sequence of a child considering a translation problem. The original concept, the available vocabulary, the closest approximation. "Marin," she said, "it means the place that does not ask." Cord looked at the step beneath them. "Marin," he said. His pronunciation was wrong. Bray corrected him. He tried again. She corrected him again. From the doorway, Rin made the sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. The sound of a person who has found something genuine in the morning when they were not expecting to find anything. "Worse," Bray said with more confidence. Cord tried again. The mountain morning moved around them, light and cold and clear, the kind that smells like pine and iron, and the clean absence of everything that isn't necessary. Three people on a porch, two of them on a step they had built crooked twice and level on the third try, one leaning in a doorway with tea, the tree line green and still. Later, when the tea was finished and the tools were out again and the shutter was nearly done, Cord told Rin about Groth's letter, about the strip of land at the base of the ridge, about ground that belonged to neither side on any map. Rin listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Bray, who was sitting on the new step watching a hawk circle the valley. "There is a spring on that land," Rin said. "I know it. My father used to camp there in his trapping seasons. The water runs even in January." Cord looked at her. "Good water," she said, "and the slope faces east. You'd get morning light." "In the corner, or Shurish?" "Saba Henholmar," Cord said. Rin looked at him. "We'd want the rooms in the corner, where the morning light comes first." She turned back to watch Bray. The hawk had landed on a fence post at the yard's edge. Bray was very still, watching it with the quality of attention she brought to all things that required patience. The bird stayed for a long moment. Then it spread its wings and was gone. Bray watched the sky where it had been. She said in Orc that it will come back. Rin asked how she knew. "Because it landed," Bray said. "Things that land are deciding whether to stay. If it came all the way down to the post, it was already thinking about staying." Cord set his tools down and sat on the step beside his daughter. He said, in badly accented Orc, what Rin had told him the night before, the word he had practiced twice this morning before the light came up. "Cohen." Bray looked at him. His pronunciation was not right. It was better than yesterday. "Not right." She corrected him. He repeated it. She considered this. Then she made the hand gesture. "It will do." Rin said it from the doorway then, not to anyone in particular, not as a lesson or a conclusion, but the way you say a word when you need to hear it outside your own head, when you need to release it into the air and let the mountain receive it, Cohen. And the mountain morning received it the way mountains receive everything set at elevation, without preference, without judgment, with the quiet permanence of things that have been here long enough to understand that what people build when they finally stop being afraid of building is the only thing that lasts. The roots were going down, not into the garrison, which had 60 days, not into the ground that belonged to the federal government, which had decided it had other uses for this particular piece of earth, into the place at the base of the ridge where the spring ran clear even in January, where the slope faced east, where the morning light would fall first in whatever corner they chose, into the choosing itself. Three people on a porch in the Appalachian morning, one of them learning a word for the third time, one of them drinking the last of her tea, one of them watching the sky where a hawk had been, all of them in the same place at the same time, which was, as it turned out, all that Cohen had ever required.